Hello everyone and welcome to a very hot afternoon here in some lonely roads. Today we have the 2010 Toyota Yaris. This is the four-door version of the Yaris. There is also a two-door version and a van. So this is the four-door. It is a 1.4 diesel, the D4D, and it produces 88 horsepower and 151 pound-feet of torque. Now this I know does not sound like much, but this is a light car, remember, so it does get up and go pretty nicely for what it is. This must be a base model Yaris from what I can tell. This is not my car, so I don't have a lot of information on it, but the rear windows are non-power windows and the wheels are steel, so if it's not the completely base model, it must be one of the cheapest options you could get back then. It has a 6-speed manual, which is pretty nice to have. You would be surprised at how many cars still do not use a 6-speed manual to this day. I have actually driven a 2017 Fiat Abarth a couple of days ago, and it was a 5-speed manual, and I was pretty surprised to find out that a car this new still has a 5-speed manual. But the Abarth was launched many years ago, and I think that's the reason why it still uses a 5-speed. Anyway, back to the Yaris. It has front disc brakes and rear drum brakes, which is adequate for a car that is this light and not that fast, and most of the cars in this category do run rear drum brakes. There aren't many drawbacks to the drum brakes. They are actually good and effective in stopping the vehicle, but they do tend to run a bit hot because cooling them is a bit more difficult than cooling disc brakes. Inside the Yaris there are a lot of cheap and hard plastics, but this is what you would expect from a 14, let's say 12 to 14,000 euro when new Toyota hatchback. However, there are a lot of storage spaces in this interior. You would definitely won't run out of places to put your things in, and it is quite roomy in here because this car is designed basically like an egg. It is short and really tall. You definitely feel that there is a lot of room in this cabin, so that's a good thing actually for a car that is this small. The back seat space is acceptable, and the trunk space is also acceptable. You wouldn't expect much more from a car of this category. So I think it's time to take this car for a drive and see how it performs on the road. So setting off in the 2010 Yaris. Now we are at a twistier section of the road, so this is a pretty good opportunity to test the handling of this car. Now I know this car was never meant to handle well. It is not a sports car, but all cars should handle well enough to where they are safe to drive in an emergency situation. This car definitely feels top heavy through the corners, and there is a lot of body roll, but it isn't something to actually worry about. In an emergency situation, I believe you would be more than safe in this car, because newer cars are really engineered with accident avoidance in mind, so emergency maneuvers can be performed in these cars safely. Now, when pulling off from a stop in the Yaris, you can definitely feel how easy it is to engage the clutch, and that is down to this car being a diesel. Diesel engines have a lot of torque, as I'm sure you know, and when engaging the clutch, the engine runs at low RPM, so it is really easy to engage the clutch. This car actually needs zero gas input to engage the clutch. It is really easy off the line, and that cannot be said for the 1.3 liter petrol Yaris, because that one does not have this much torque, and because it doesn't have much torque, it is hard to get off the line. Now, the higher amounts of torque in this car are also very welcome when driving this car in the city and on the highway also. This car pulls pretty nicely between 2000 and 3500 RPM, and on the highway it sits at 2000 RPM at 60 miles per hour, and at 2500 RPM at 70 miles per hour. So it does drive at pretty low RPM, considering what type of car this is. And because this engine tends to run at lower RPMs, because it has a lot of power and you do not have to rev the engine out to get this thing to move, it does manage some pretty good economy. Over the last 2 weeks, I did get 4.5 liters per 100 kilometers, or 62 miles per gallon UK, or 52 miles per gallon US. So it is a very economical car. Now, at higher speeds, this car has a lot of wind noise and tire noise. The tire noise can be down to the actual tires themselves, because this car runs some pretty old Dunlop tires that are hard. So tire noise can be solved with some better tires. But the wind noise is completely down to how this car was made from the factory, and the insulation that was put inside the doors and underneath the carpets. So you cannot really change the wind noise in a car, but you can definitely change the tire noise. Now, at highway speeds, especially when there are side winds, this car tends to move around a bit, so it is not the most stable car when driving in a windy highway, let's say. So that might be something you would want to consider when driving on the highway. Another thing you would want to consider when driving on the highway, because driving on the highway typically means driving for prolonged periods of time, is that this car does not have an armrest, and a car without an armrest can get really uncomfortable on a long trip in the city, which of course this car was designed to be driven in the city, and I think that's why this car does not have an armrest. And costs also, because the more things you put in a car, the more costly it is to produce the car. But when driving in traffic and in the city, you always change gears, and changing gears means that you do not have really the time to rest your hand on the armrest, and I think that's part of the reason why this car does not have an armrest. Now, when driving this car, you would also notice how light the steering, the clutch, and the gear shifts are. This car was really designed with ease of use and economy in mind. It was not designed with performance and drivability in mind. Drivability in terms of it being quiet and it handling well. Its German rivals definitely do handle better. They are a lot stiffer, and they are a lot quieter on the road. This car is pretty softly sprung, which makes for an okay ride, but as I said before, there is quite a lot of body roll in the corners, and that is down to the spring rate of this car. The brakes on this car are pretty good, considering they are drum brakes. But what many people don't understand is that drum brakes are very efficient at braking. They are good at stopping a car down, but they are bad at cooling themselves down, because drum brakes are a closed system. So they do tend to struggle with cooling and not braking. So that being said, The brakes of this car are pretty respectable for the type of car this is. I mean, it is not a performance car, so you don't need really good brakes on it. Now, the final criticism I have for this car, which is a personal thing, and seating position is a personal preference that differences from person to person. But I do feel that the seating position in this car is pretty, it is too high and too upright, and I do not like this. I do prefer a seating position that is low to the ground, and a seat that hugs you and keeps you in place, and this seat definitely does not keep you in place, and it is not low to the ground. Now, with all of these things in mind, this is now a used car, a 10-year-old used car. This specific car has 114,000 kilometers on the clock. So these cars sell for about 4,000 to 4,500 euros. So they are pretty cheap. So for 4,000 euros, let's say, you get an economical, very reliable, as most Toyota vehicles are, and especially these early Yaris models, they are very reliable. So you get a cheap, reliable, and very economical car to drive around in the city, and you can also drive it on the motorway if you don't mind not having an armrest. So yeah, this those are my opinions on the 2010 Yaris. So thank you for watching, and see you on the next one. Bye.